Hey everybody, this is Pastor Michael at Ascension Lutheran Church in Torrance, California. It's time for another midweek boost. I want to begin by reading from 2 Timothy chapter 3. This is Paul talking. He says, "In the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive." He goes on with a whole host of offenses that people will be guilty of. And then he tells Timothy, avoid such people. Now, the first thing I want to address very quickly is that when Paul is talking about last days, he's not talking about the last days right before the resurrection of all flesh and the ushering in of the new creation. The last days actually began with the ascension of Jesus into power and glory, where he inaugurated his kingdom on this earth. We are in the last days now. We were in the last days when Timothy got this letter from Paul. Otherwise, it would have no meaning for Timothy. If Paul was talking about thousands of years from now, this is the way it's going to look. No, he was telling Timothy, we're in the last days. We are going to experience, people being lovers of money, lovers of themselves, arrogant, boastful, and abusive. And then he says, stay away from such people. And I would say, even more importantly, don't be one of those people. Well, how do we avoid it? By our own efforts, deciding I'm going to be a good person. I'm not going to be one of those people. Well, we can't avoid these people or even avoid being one of those people without first knowing the love of God for ourselves. The only way to live in accordance with His law is to first understand His grace. We are called to a life not of arrogance and love of money and love of self, but a life of self-denial, a life of the cross. 1 John tells us in chapter 3, by this we know what love is, that He laid His life down for us, and that we ought to lay our lives down for our brothers. We're called to a life of servanthood, a life of the cross, bearing one another's burdens, forgiving people as they sin against us, praying for them, praying for our enemies, loving our enemies, doing good to those that harm us. That's what our life is supposed to be in Christ Jesus. But we can never do that by our own efforts, as if we could just decide to become that sort of person. No. It happens by understanding that God has loved us in the midst of our sin. Us being the scumbags that we're capable of, God still loved us. So much so that He gave up His Son for us. Jesus loved us so much so that He gave up His life for us and suffered hell for us on that cross. And it's when we realize our sinfulness and the fact that we don't deserve any of His love, yet He showed it to us despite our sin. And we receive that love and understand that our worth comes from Him and from nothing else. Then we no longer need money, and we no longer need to put others down in order to make ourselves feel okay. It's really tempting in this age of social media to put other people down, to bring attention to their flaws, to even sometimes be abusive to them because we have that shield of anonymity. I've fallen victim to this. I'm sure most of you have. Even email itself provides a shield so that people can say things that they would never say to your face. We can't be that sort of person. And Paul tells Timothy, avoid those sorts of people. Now, in order to both avoid those sorts of people and to avoid being such a person, we need to know God's love for us. Obedience always follows God's grace. As we understand his love for us, he empowers us to be the type of people that he wants us to be. Understand that our good works are always a fruit of our being rooted and grounded in Christ Jesus, so that we just do the good that comes naturally to us because we are connected to that vine, which is Jesus Christ. Today, I want you to know the love of Jesus Christ that is yours. You haven't earned it. In fact, you've done everything to keep from having it, but God doesn't care. He created you and he loves you, and he sent his son for you so that as you believe in him, he clothes you with righteousness and empowers you to live a life of servanthood, a life of the cross. Have a good night.